You've probably heard a strange knock somewhere in your house at night. A creak, a tap, a sound with no clear source. You convince yourself it's nothing. The pipes, the wind, an old house settling into itself. But in October 2003, one man heard the exact same sound, and there was no house. There was no wind. There was no one else within 300 kilometers below him. And the real answer turned out to be far stranger than anything you've ever blamed on an old house. Over the next several minutes, you're going to hear about 8 space incidents, each one stranger and more disturbing than the last. They start with a sound nobody can explain. They end with something far worse than silence. And by the end, you'll understand why some of the people who survived these missions never fully talked about them again. His name was Yang Liwei. In 2003, he became the first person China ever sent into space. He trained for years. He passed every test designed to break a person's nerve. Nothing prepared him for what happened somewhere over the dark side of the earth. He heard knocking, not engine noise, not static. A knock, like knuckles against a door, coming from outside the hull of his spacecraft. He looked around. Nothing was loose. Nothing was malfunctioning. He was alone in a sealed capsule, traveling at almost 8 kilometers per second, and something outside seemed to be asking to come in. He never reported it during the mission. He waited. He wanted to be sure he wasn't imagining it. Years later, in his memoir, he finally admitted it happened and admitted he still didn't have an explanation. Engineers have proposed theories since then. Pressure changes in the hull, thermal expansion of metal as the capsule moved between sunlight and shadow. None of the explanations have ever been confirmed. China's space agency has never issued an official statement. Why does this unsettle you more than almost any horror movie sound effect could? Psychologist Nick Canis has spent decades studying what isolation does to the astronaut brain. His research on confinement and sensory deprivation suggests something simple and disturbing. The less your senses have to work with, the more power your mind has to fill in the blanks. Yang Liwei wasn't scared of the knock itself. He was scared because, for the first time, he could not rule out that something was wrong, and there was nowhere to go to check. That same kind of unexplained event happened again 15 years later, except this time it wasn't a sound, it was a hole. In 2018, flight controllers noticed a slow pressure leak aboard the International Space Station. The crew traced it to a small hole, roughly 2 millimeters wide, drilled into the hull of a docked Soyuz capsule. Drilled, not cracked, not worn through. The astronauts patched it with epoxy and gauze, while still hundreds of kilometers above the Earth, breathing air that was quietly leaking out around them as they worked. Roscosmos opened an investigation into how the hole got there. Was it a manufacturing defect? Was it deliberate? Was it damage from something hitting the hull? The investigation's full findings were never made public. To this day, no official explanation has ever been confirmed. Doesn't that bother you more than the knock did? A sound can be explained away. A drilled hole cannot. 2 years before that, in 1970, a different kind of fear gripped mission control. The kind that comes from watching a disaster happen in real time with millions of people watching. Apollo 13 was on its way to the moon when an oxygen tank exploded, crippling the spacecraft 200,000 miles from home. You've probably heard the line, "Houston, we've had a problem." What you may not know is what came after it. The crew had to abandon their main cabin and crowd into the lunar module, a vehicle built for 2 people, not 3, and never designed to keep anyone alive for the 4 days it would take to get home. Carbon dioxide began building up to dangerous levels. Temperatures dropped close to freezing. Flight director Gene Kranz and his team had to invent a way to filter the air using parts never meant to fit together, instructing the astronauts to build it from cardboard, plastic bags, and tape, with their lives depending on whether the seal held. It held. All 3 men came home. But for 4 days, everyone involved understood that surviving was not guaranteed, and that no one on Earth could do anything more than talk them through it. That uncertainty is unsettling. What happened next wasn't uncertain at all. In 1971, the Soviet Union sent 3 cosmonauts to the Salyut 1 space station. Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev spent over 3 weeks aboard, setting a record. They were heroes before they even landed. Then they came home, and the ground crews opened the capsule expecting celebration. All 3 men were dead, seated calmly. No signs of struggle. No alarm triggered in time to save them. During re-entry, a valve had opened too early, releasing the cabin's air into the vacuum of space. The men had roughly 40 seconds of consciousness once the depressurization began. Investigators later found they had tried to close the valve manually, but it required strength and precision that becomes almost impossible once oxygen starts leaving your blood. Within moments, they lost consciousness. Within minutes, they were gone, calm, seated, as if nothing at all had happened. There was no warning sound to alert anyone, no chance to brace for what was coming. The silence wasn't a mystery. The silence was the danger. After Soyuz 11, the Soviet space program made a permanent rule. From then on, cosmonauts would wear pressure suits during re-entry every single time, no exceptions. But 10 years earlier, before any of these men ever reached orbit, a different death had already been quietly buried by the same program, one that took far longer than 40 seconds. In March 1961, a young Soviet trainee named Valentin Bondarenko was nearing the end of a 15-day isolation chamber test designed to simulate the conditions of spaceflight. The chamber was pressurized with an oxygen-rich atmosphere. As he finished a medical check, he wiped his skin with an alcohol-soaked cotton pad and tossed it aside. It landed on an exposed electric hot plate. In a normal room, it might have smoldered. In that oxygen-rich chamber, it ignited instantly, and the fire spread across the room and onto his flight suit within seconds. Rescuers outside the chamber could see him burning through the small window, but the chamber door couldn't be opened immediately because the pressure inside had to be carefully equalized first, or the door itself could kill everyone nearby. By the time they reached him, he had suffered burns over almost his entire body. He stayed conscious long enough to apologize to the doctors treating him, saying it was his own fault, and he survived in agony for 8 days before he died. The Soviet government did not announce his death. His name was removed from official cosmonaut records. The world did not learn what happened to him until the story finally surfaced more than 20 years later. A sound you can't explain is unsettling. A held breath during a 4-day crisis is unsettling, but a slow, conscious death covered up so completely that it took 2 decades for anyone outside a small circle to even know his name existed sits with you differently. It means some of these stories you're hearing right now might still be missing pieces, which brings you to a story that may have grown larger than the truth itself, though what's confirmed about it is disturbing enough on its own. In 1967, the Soviet Union launched Soyuz 1, its first crewed flight in years, with cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov aboard. According to multiple accounts from people connected to the program, Engineers had identified over 200 structural problems with the capsule before launch, and some have claimed Komarov knew the mission was likely to fail. He reportedly flew anyway, because the only trained backup pilot was a close friend, and he didn't want that friend to die in his place. The mission unraveled almost immediately. A solar panel failed to deploy. Navigation systems gave incorrect readings. After more than a day of compounding failures, Komarov was ordered to attempt re-entry, and the parachute system failed catastrophically, causing the capsule to strike the ground at enormous speed. Some retellings claim he spent his final minutes aware of what was coming. No verified recording of his last words has ever been made public, and serious historians caution that parts of the story may have been dramatized over the decades. What isn't disputed is that the government knew the capsule wasn't ready, launched it anyway, and a man who may have understood his own danger flew into it regardless to protect someone else. Doesn't that sit differently than an accident? An accident is something nobody could have prevented. This was something people may have chosen not to prevent. Which brings you to 1986, and an incident most people have seen footage of without understanding the full weight of what investigators eventually discovered. The Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch in front of a live television audience that included the families of the 7 crew members. For years, the public assumption was that the crew died instantly in the explosion. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Dr. Joseph Kerwin, a physician and former astronaut, led the medical investigation into the crew's final moments. His findings, now known as the Kerwin Report, concluded that the structural breakup likely did not kill the crew immediately. The crew cabin remained largely intact after separating from the rest of the vehicle. Investigators found that several switches on the control panel, switches that require a deliberate 2-step motion to activate, had been flipped during the fall. Those switches don't move on their own. Someone, possibly several someones, was alive, conscious, and trying to regain control of a cabin that was already falling, with no possible way to survive the impact with the ocean below. The fall took roughly 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Sit with that for a moment. Not an instant, not a blink of pain followed by nothing. Nearly 3 minutes, conscious, falling, knowing. By now, you're looking at people who understood exactly what was happening to them, with full clarity and no way out. Which leads to the final incident, the one investigators say is the hardest of all to read in full detail. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. The Columbia Crew's Survival Investigation Report, released years later by NASA, reconstructed second by second what the crew experienced as their vehicle came apart around them. The report found the crew remained conscious and were actively responding to cascading system failures for a period of time after the first signs of structural damage appeared. They were troubleshooting, communicating, trying to save the vehicle and themselves, even as data later showed the situation had already become unsurvivable. The investigation led directly to changes in how future astronauts would be trained, strapped in, and equipped specifically to give future crews a better chance in scenarios just like this one. You don't need every technical detail to understand the core of what that report represents. It means a group of trained, intelligent people spend their final functioning moments doing exactly what their training told them to do, refusing to stop trying. Even with the outcome already decided by physics, they couldn't see or stop. So why does any of this matter to you? Sitting somewhere on solid ground, with gravity holding you exactly where you expect it to. Because every single one of these incidents traces back to the same unbearable gap. The gap between what a person can perceive and what is actually happening around them. Yang Li Wei heard a sound and couldn't know if it meant danger. The crew of the ISS found a hole with no explanation. The Apollo 13 crew waited 4 days without knowing if their fix would hold. The cosmonauts on Soyuz 11 felt nothing wrong until it was already too late to fix it. Bondarenko's death was hidden so completely that history itself didn't know about it for 20 years. Komarov may have known the risk and chosen it anyway, for someone else's sake. The Challenger and Columbia crews understood exactly what was happening, in real time, with nothing left to do but try. You live with a smaller version of that same gap every day. You don't actually know what's happening behind a closed door, inside another car at a red light, or 3 minutes into your own future. Most of the time, that doesn't matter, because nothing goes wrong. These 8 incidents exist because, for a handful of people in human history, it did. So the next time you hear a strange knock somewhere in your house, and you tell yourself it's nothing, remember what you just learned. It's not really the knock you should think about. It's the fact that somewhere, once, a person heard the exact same kind of sound, in the exact same kind of silence, and never found out what it was.